Today's daf we're going to be learning is Makkot daf Kaf. Today's daf is sponsored by Rochelle Chayfetz in loving memory of her mother, Chana Cohen, Chana Bat Rav Moshe, and Sipora Mashbaum on her fourth year at site. You graced us all with your glorious smile, innate wisdom, and beautiful neshama. To say that you are missed every day is an understatement. And today's daf is dedicated for the refuah shlema of Elad ben Neta, actually a soldier who was injured on Friday. Okay, we're going to get started with the bottom of Yud Tet Amud Bet. We started with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, and just a reminder, the Siyum is on Friday at the usual Zoom time. It will be a bit of a different kind of Siyum. We will finish the Masechet together, say the Hadrans, and that will be our program for the Siyum this time. Hope to see you all there. It's a good time to join the Zoom, as long as it's not some crazy, ungodly hour of night for you. Okay. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So what did he say? He said this halacha that's interesting that we actually paskin, which is we said that you get lashes for maaser sheni for eating it outside Jerusalem, right? That was the whole chutz l'choma. Remember, there were two mishnayot of maaser sheni. We said one is chutz l'choma and one is if it's impure. If you eat it outside the walls of Jerusalem, but it's not just any maaser sheni you eat outside the walls of Jerusalem. Only maaser sheni that went into the walls, meaning went into Jerusalem and came out of Jerusalem. Okay, that's the case. So now the Gemara brings, and that they darshan from the pasuk because it says you have to eat it before God, and then it says you can't eat it in your gates. So they say only if it already was before God is the forbidden not to eat it outside your gates. So if it goes into Jerusalem, then is taken out of Jerusalem, you get lashes for that. And you eat it, obviously. Only if you eat it will you get lashes. So now the Gemara brings a meitive. So in my Gemara, it's 3 lines from the bottom of your Tedem Bet. Rabbi Yosi Omer. Now we're bringing a Tanaitic source to go against what Rabbi Yochanan says. Kohen she'alta biyado te'ena shel tevel. We have a Kohen, and he finds a fig, or he has a fig, which Truma and maaser weren't taken from. Because it's a Kohen, what's going to happen? As soon as he designates this as Truma, he actually can eat it himself. So what's he going to do? Amar te'ena zo trumata be'uktzah. He's now going to designate different parts of this one fig, that each part of it is a different element of one of these things that you have to separate. So he says right near the stem, that part is truma. Maaser rishon b'tzvona. In the northern part of it, meaning the upper part, right, we're going to call that part is maaser rishon, which goes to the Levi, but even a Kohen can eat it, even a non-Levi can eat it, really. Maaser sheni l'droma. The maaser sheni is in the southern part of this fig. V'hish not maaser sheni. That's if it's the maaser sheni year, because remember, years 1, 2, 4, and 5 are maaser sheni. Years 3 and 6 are maaser ani. And assuming he's in Jerusalem, because we're going to see, because then he's going to eat it all. Now, it's not a problem because it's truma, which he can eat. It's maaser, which he can eat. The maaser sheni he can eat in Jerusalem. Okay, there's one thing missing. What's missing? He forgot to separate the truma from the maaser. Okay, once the Levi gets the maaser, the Levi has to separate a tenth of it. And even if, right, if it's not going to go to the Levi, then whoever has it has to separate a tenth. So that's the one mistake he made here. He didn't separate truma maaser. Oh, maaser ani b'gvulin, or it's maaser ani year, and then even if he's outside Jerusalem, it doesn't matter. Achala. Now, if he eats it and he's in Jerusalem and he's a Kohen and he has no problems except for that one problem that he forgot to do truma maaser, loke echat. So he did one sin, which is right whatever's left, right, the maaser part of it that he ate has truma that wasn't separated, which means that that part of it was tevel, non-tithed produce. Vizar sha'achala lo keshtayim. Now, if it's a non-Kohen who this happened to, he would get 2 sets of lashes because number 1, he ate the truma, which is forbidden, and number 2, he also didn't separate the truma maaser. She'ilu b'tchila achala eno lo ke'el echad. Now, here's an ironic thing. If he hadn't done all the separating of the truma and maaser, the zar would only have been liable 1 because it wasn't yet truma. So he'd only be liable not for eating truma, but for eating untithed produce. Now he has both the untithed produce of the maaser he forgot to take the truma from, and he has the fact that he ate truma, which was designated for a kohen. So that's a little bit ironic. Okay, but what was the point of all this, and why were we here? Because we were trying to say the maaser sheni, you're only liable when you go into Jerusalem and then out, and then you eat the maaser sheni. That's when you'll get lashes. There's no lashes here for maaser sheni because they were in Jerusalem. But what are they darshan here? The reason why, let's go with the Zar. The Zar gets 2 sets of lashes because he doesn't get lashes for maaser sheni because he's in Jerusalem. Habigvulin sounds like if he was outside Jerusalem, right? They specifically took a case of in Jerusalem. If he was outside Jerusalem, we would have to add another one, lo keshalosh. Now notice, this was not a case where it was brought into Jerusalem and outside Jerusalem. So de'af agav de lavro epnei choma. Even if it hadn't seen the city walls, it sounds like if it was all outside Jerusalem and they designated the maaser sheni and then ate it, be liable another set of lashes. To which the Gemara answers, must have been de'ayle ve'afke. He's only going to be liable the lashes, right? Again, this is all from an inference in the source. The inference is that Rabbi Yosi would hold that's the Tana of this Mishnah, that it must have gone in and out, and then it doesn't contradict what Rabbi Yochanan said, that you'll be liable lashes for eating it outside Jerusalem if it had already seen the city walls and was taken out. So the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. If it had already gone in the walls and was taken out, and the person eats the maaser sheni, what's this braita telling us? It's quite obvious. Everybody knows this, right? This is not something we would need a braita to say. Now, it's interesting because the braita is actually talking about other stuff, but they're assuming that this inference was a necessary inference. Otherwise, they didn't have to bring a case where it was in Jerusalem. The fact that they added a case that was in Jerusalem sounds like if it was outside Jerusalem, it would be a problem. And right, you would get another set of lashes. And if you brought it in and then took it out, everybody knows that. You wouldn't need to tell us that. So to which they answer, Hacha b'mayaskina kegonda ailinu b'tivlayu. Now we're going to learn a new halacha, which is if you brought it into Jerusalem, it is a case where it was brought in and taken out, but it was brought into Jerusalem, this fig, without being tithed, and then was taken out. And the chidush is that even though it was brought in when it was still tevel, it wasn't yet called maaser sheni, it's as if it was brought in as maaser sheni. So let's go back to this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan. When are you liable lashes? When you take the maaser sheni into Jerusalem and take it out. Now we're going to learn, even if you took it in before the maaser sheni was taken, you took tevel, which is untithed produce, you brought it into Jerusalem, took it out of Jerusalem, then separated the maaser, that's maaser that was taken in and out that you would get lashes for. And that's what this is trying to tell you. Why? This is based on Rabbi Yosi told. This is a machloket. Kasaval matnot shelo hurmu kemisho hurmu damyan. If you have a pile of grains that no or any kind of produce that maaser weren't taken yet, it's as if the maaser were taken. The way I like to think of this is the sum of is a whole of its the whole is the sum of its parts. Right? When you look at something whole, untithed, it's as if, right? Since later you're going to take the truma to maaser, it's as if it's already truma maaser, right? Truma maaser, maaser sheni. It's as if, right? It's as if you were wearing these glasses like X-ray. You can see in it, it's already got all those things separated. Which means that when it went into Jerusalem, even though it wasn't called maaser at that point, it really was, because that whole bundle was made up of some maaser in it, because later you're going to take maaser from it. So that's what we're going to assume Rabbi Yosi holds, and that's what he was trying to teach us, that it went in and out, even though that's not really such a chiddush, and that's why you'd be liable maaser sheni. Again, this was in Jerusalem, but if it weren't in Jerusalem, it would have been as if, right? It would have been as if it was taken in and out, as if it was maaser sheni that was taken in and out. So even though the maaser sheni wasn't taken, since later it's taken, right? We view it already at that point as if it had maaser sheni in it. And that's enough to basically say, it went into the city, maaser sheni went into the city. But we're going to have a bit of a problem with this. V'sava Rabbi Yosi matnot shelo hurmu kemisho hurmu damyan. Wait a minute. Does Rabbi Yosi really hold by that side of the machloket? Now we're going to see he doesn't really seem to hold that way. He seems to hold, if it was tevel, it's tevel, it's not maaser. Okay? So how are we going to see this? Well, this relates to something is quoted in the name of Rabbi Yosi, Hatanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Yosi, the same Rabbi Yosi. And now this is all about Beit Shammai Beit Hillel have a machloket, and he has an opinion about what their machloket is about. Okay, it wasn't clear which case they were arguing about. He says, this is what I think they're arguing about. And always, we're going to hold like Beit Hillel. So we're going to have to see what Rabbi Yosi says, Beit Hillel says, and we're going to see that Rabbi Yosi says, Beit Hillel says, that matnot shelo hurmu, if you haven't yet taken the masrot, matnot shelo hurmu damya. It's as if they haven't been taken. We don't view it as maaser. Okay, now we're going to see. So first we're going to see where they don't argue. That's not really connected yet. If you have produce that wasn't yet finished. What does it mean finished? Well, until Gmar Malacha, which we'll talk about in a minute what that is, you're not obligated in maaser. So if you have produce that you have in bundles, but you didn't put them in the pile and flatten the pile out, that's called Gmar Malacha. Before that point, you're not even liable. You don't even have to take maaser yet. So if you have produce that you haven't yet done that to, and of Ruby Yerushalayim, and they went in, okay, they went into Jerusalem. So nobody thinks that that's as if maaser sheni went into Jerusalem because they weren't even obligated yet in maaser sheni, okay? And therefore, sheyipadeh maaser sheni shalahem v'yachel b'chol makom. So what could, now, there's another issue. One is, right, once it went into Jerusalem, right, and then we take it out, so you're no longer allowed to, right, then if you eat it outside Jerusalem, you're then liable. Because that's called klitat mechitzot for eating. That means it went in the walls, and now, right, you can't eat it anymore outside Jerusalem, and also you have to eat it in Jerusalem, right? The walls are the border in terms of eating. But the walls are also important for another element, which is, if it goes in the walls of the city. Now, maaser sheni I have in my house, I'm allowed to redeem it onto a coin. But I'm not allowed to do that if I'm in Jerusalem. And not only that, if I went into Jerusalem, brought them into Jerusalem, took them out of Jerusalem, I can no longer redeem them. So now that's our issue. So he says, if they went in before Truma and Masrot were taken, and before it was even obligated in Truma and Masrot, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree that once it goes into Jerusalem, it's irrelevant because there's no shame maaser on this at all. It's not even obligated maaser, which means if it's taken out of Jerusalem after that, you can redeem it. You padeh maaser sheni shalahem, and once you redeem it, you can eat it anywhere because right the sanctity was moved on to the coin. But what is their machloket? And again, you have to pay attention to what Beit Hillel says. We're going to see Beit Hillel basically says, "Manot shelo hurmu." If you haven't yet taken true on a masrot, it's as if there is no maaser in there, okay, for this issue. And that's going to be a contradiction because that's what Rabbi Yosi says, Beit Hillel says, and we just explained Rabbi Yosi is saying the opposite. So let's read it. What's their machloket? If they're already ready, you've done the last stage that already obligates them in maaser. And then you brought them into Jerusalem. Now, according to what we think Rabbi Yosi said, what's he going to say? We view that as if the maaser sheni was in Jerusalem, and once you take it out, you won't be able to redeem it anymore. But what does he say? Shabbat Shammai omrim yachzir maaser sheni shalahem v'yachel b'Yerushalayim. You have to bring the maaser sheni back and eat it in Jerusalem. You can't redeem it anymore. Beit Hillel omrim, but Beit Hillel disagree and say yipadeh v'yachel b'kol makom. It's as if it wasn't maaser sheni because you didn't yet call it maaser sheni. So that seems to be the opposite. Even though you haven't separated, it's as if you separated, which is how we explain Rabbi Yosi. Right? This already went into the walls of the city, even though it was tevel, it was untithed. It was already obligated to be tithed, and therefore it should have been viewed as if the maaser sheni went into Jerusalem. So we have a total contradiction. And what we did was we answered a previous question and explained what was he trying to say about it being in Jerusalem if it hadn't gone into the city, to which he said, oh, it did go in the city and came out of the city, but it went in his tevel, and that's the unique halacha he was trying to teach us. Here it sounds like if it went in his tevel, it wouldn't be an issue. But if you notice, okay, here's the issue. There we were talking about a different issue. There the issue was if it went into Jerusalem and was taken out, would you get lashes for eating it outside Jerusalem? Here we're talking about once it goes into Jerusalem and it's taken out, you can no longer redeem it. That's a different issue. And not only is it a different issue, but to resolve the contradiction, Rabba is going to explain the difference between the two issues. Rabba, this is at least one answer. We're going to have two answers to this problem. Mechitza le'echol de'oraita. The whole issue of getting lashes, obviously it's deoraita. Lashes is always on a Torah issue. The issue of it having gone in and out of Jerusalem, and now you can't eat it anymore outside Jerusalem, that obviously the walls of Jerusalem are, kind of have effect on this maaser. That's a Torah issue. Since it's a Torah issue, we're going to be strict and say, even though it went in as tevel, untithed produce, we're going to view it as if it was tithed already, made up of maaser sheni, as if the maaser sheni went into Jerusalem. We're always more stringent with Doraita halachas. But mechitza liklot, but the whole issue that once it leaves Jerusalem, you can no longer redeem it. In other words, normally if it's outside Jerusalem, you can redeem it. If it went into the city and came out of the city again, the fact that you can't redeem it anymore, which is the issue in the second source we saw, that's derabbanan. It's only rabbinic. The chigazer rabbanan, when the rabbis made that gzerah, They only did it ki'ita be'ene when it's actually maaser sheni, and not this looking at it through an X-ray machine as if it's made up, right, or what will be in the future, that it will be maaser, so we're going to view it as maaser now, right? Betivle lo gazer rabbanan. If it's tevel, the rabbis didn't make their gezerah, and that resolves the problem. Okay, that's one way of resolving the problem. Now, the whole problem started because we said, right now, if you don't take this answer of the mechitza lechol d'Rabbanan, not liklot doraita, not liklot is d'Rabbanan, that's one way of resolving it. So we go back to the original question, and we have this problem because we can't explain the whole thing that it went in, it went out, specifically, right, that it went in as tevel, and that the whole issue has to do with manot shelo hurmu, because we get into this contradiction, which again, we can resolve. But if you want to avoid resolving that contradiction, Ravina comes with a different answer. Ravina says, Kigon did not get lebekanya. It wasn't, remember where we started. We said it went in and it went out. And then we said, well, if it went in and it went out, what's the problem? Well, it's obvious you're going to get lashes. And I don't need an inference from this source to tell me something obvious. Well, he's going to say, how did it go in? It went in not in a typical way. Okay, the first option was it went in not in a typical way because it wasn't even maaser when it went in. Now, Ravina is going to suggest it went in on one of these poles. You were holding a pole, and behind you was the little satchel with produce in it. We had this question before. If you remember, we asked this as a question. We didn't have an answer to it. Now, if I went into the city with this big pole on my back, and all the way in the back was the satchel with the produce, but the produce never made it in the walls, but I made it in the walls while I was carrying it. Is that as if it entered into the walls or not? That's what Rav Papa asked. We saw this, I think it was yesterday. So now they're going to say, we can answer this question because as Ravina is going to say, Kigon did not get lebekanya. This, not that we can answer this question, we can infer from this braita, we really can get here to an answer because he's saying maybe that's what's unique about it and not obvious. Maybe it was that it went into Jerusalem, but didn't really go into Jerusalem. It went into Jerusalem because the person carrying it went into Jerusalem, even though that didn't go into Jerusalem. And then what Rabbi Yosi is saying is, right, remember, he said it was maaser sheni, he was in Jerusalem, but if he was out of Jerusalem, if he left Jerusalem after going in and out, right, but with the fig in the satchel, and the satchel never went into the city, you'd be obligated one set of lashes here for that. Then Tifsha Baya to Rav Papa. If we take Ravina's explanation, we now have an answer to Rav Papa's question, which we didn't have an answer to previously. So that's the second option of how to understand why it went in and out, and yet why do we need to tell you this is pretty obvious? So either because it went in and out as tevel, or it went in and out in the satchel, and the satchel never really went in, just the person carrying it. Okay, and with that, we end that section. Now we're going to get to a new Mishnah, which discusses a bunch of Isurim, that many of them are mentioned both in Vayikra and in Dvarim. Some of them we're going to see, maybe we'll start with the first one and we'll read the psukim inside first, appear in two different sections, like I said, one in Parshat Emor, about the Kohanim and all the things the Kohanim have special, unique halachot, and it's also mentioned in Sefer Dvarim for everybody. Okay, so let's read the two psukim. One is Vayikra Kaf Aleph Pasukei. Lo yikruchu korcha berosham. You can't make yourself bald, like pull out hairs, okay, on your head. Notice the words yikruchu korcha, which is double language. It could have just said lo yikruchu. We're going to darshan all this soon. On your heads. Upe'atz kanam lo yigalech. When you can't shave the peot, right, the parts near your temples, you can't shave those. Ubivsaram lo yisatu saratet. And you can't make scratches on your body, like serious wounds to your body. Now, the lo yikruchu korcha and the b'saram lo yisatu saratet in general are understood to be about a dead person. And as if you're upset about a dead person, you can't injure your body, basically pull out hairs and make injuries to your body. Now, it doesn't say there anything about dead bodies, and it adds this one that has nothing to do with that. Okay, and yes, these were pagan ways of mourning. Thank you, Ruth. Now, this pasuk in Dvarim, pasuk Aleph says, Yodale, pasuk Aleph, Banim atem l'Hashem Elokechem, you are sons of God, and therefore lo titgodedu v'lo tasimu korcha b'neinechem l'meit. Don't do anything destructive to your body, and don't pull out hairs for a dead body. Now, notice there's a few differences. Lo tasimu korcha instead of lo yikruchu korcha, right? Don't put baldness between your eyes. And between your eyes, you might think, or between your eyebrows. Most of them explain it's between your eyes and your forehead. In other words, the space like right above your eyes, on your forehead. Don't pull out hairs from there. And it sounds like just there. In the first pasuk, it said birosham, on all your head. Here it says between your eyes, and here it says lemate for a dead body, okay? Meaning for mourning for someone, as opposed to just, random, like don't do it ever. So we're going to learn all about this. So the Mishnah, that's the first case in the Mishnah. You get lashes for hakoreach korcha b'rosho, if you pull out hairs in your head. Hamakif pe'at rosho, if you, now makif is to make a circle. We're going to talk about this later. You take off the pe'ot, okay, by, really, I'll already tell you now, if you take off the pe'ot over here and you draw a line like from your forehead to your ears and back around, it's kind of making this rounded haircut type thing, and it's a problem. Hamashchit pe'atz kano, if you destroy the pe'ot of your beard, okay, these are, we're going to see in a minute in the Mishnah, there's 5 of them. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute when we get in the Mishnah. And if you make even one scratch in your body for a dead body, a dead person, what if you have 5 people who were killed, and in mourning for them, you made one scratch on your body? Or you did 5 for one person. Both that case and that case, which is very interesting, because you would think one scratch for 5 people, how do you get 5, right? It's one action, you get 5 sets of lashes for, okay, for each person. We're going to see later in the Gemara where they get this from. Or if it's just one person and you're mourning just that one person, you get 5. Both of those are very unique halachot. We're going to have to explain them later. Okay, now we're going back to the earlier in the Mishnah when they talk about the pe'ot of the Rosh and the pe'ot of the Zakan. There's very good pictures in the Koran if you have the Koran. Al harosh shtayim, achat mikan ve'achat mikan. So there's 2 for the pe'ot harosh, one on this side, one on that side, and again that's right by the temples. Al zakan, right under them. Al zakan, shtayim mikan u'shtayim mikan ve'achat lamata. Now they don't really explain where. 2 on this side, 2 on that side, and 1 in the middle. Okay, 1 in the middle is on the bottom of the beard by the chin. Okay, the 2 on the side, there's big debate about where all these are really. But if you look in the Quran, they give a picture of one of the opinions. Okay, they don't give a picture of all the opinions, but it seems to be under where the pe'ot are, and then further lower than that, and then on your chin. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im nitlu kulan ke'echad, eno chayav el echad. If you had like a unique kind of razor that could shave it all off in one movement of the razor and get to all the spots, you're only going to be liable 1. Another machloka between, okay, so now Rabbi Eliezer, now he seems to be arguing with the rabbis. The rabbis seem to say each one is judged independently. Even if you take them all off at once, you'd be liable 5. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says there's a way you could only be liable 1. It has to be done with a razor for you to be liable lashes. But Rabbi Eliezer Omer, afilu liktoba malaket or berihini chayav. Okay, malaket, rihini, there's different interpretations of what these are. But we'll go with the standard. The malaket is to pick out like a tweezer, if you take them out with a tweezer, or berihini, which is like more like they say a plain, like a sharp tool that's not like a razor though. The idea is that these don't do they don't give you a very as clean a shave as the razor does. And that's where, right, so the common thinks it's just a razor, and the others think it's with these other implements. Tanu Rabbanan. So we're going to get into all that a little bit more tomorrow, all those different things. But now we're going to start with the lo yikruchu korcha. Tanu Rabbanan, lo yikruchu. Echol afilu karach arba v'chamesh krichot lo yeh chayav al echad. You might have thought, if I pull out hairs in a bunch of different places, right, I do it 4 or 5 times. 4 or 5 is always this number they use to mean like a lot, more than 3. You're only going to be liable once. You might have thought, Talmud Lamar. Now we're going to start. This is all a midrash halachah, darshaning all the words in this pasuk. Talmud Lamar korcha lechayev al kol korcha or korcha, because it says lo yikruchu korcha. It could have just said lo yikruchu. Don't bald yourself. What does it mean? Don't bald yourself by becoming bald. Something like that. A bald by doing. Right, the korcha is a noun as opposed to a verb. So why is there a noun added there? It's to tell you on each one and that you do, you're going to be liable. Okay, soon we'll get to what's the shiur, like what's the requisite amount of pulling out hairs. Okay, is it every hair? Is it more? Is it something? We're going to talk about that too. Birosham, matamud lamal. Why does it say lo yikruchu korcha birosham? Again, I'm reminding you, we're in the psukim right now about the kohanim. Don't make a korcha. So that we just said on each one independently, you'll be liable. Birosham matamud lamal. Well, why does it say on your head? Because if you looked at the other pasuk that I mentioned before, remember it says just bein einechem, between your eyes. So lefishin emar lo titgodu v'lo tasimu korcha bein einechem lemeit, because it says there just bein einechem, yachol lo yehi chayav ele bein einayim bovad. You might have thought you're only liable for pulling out hairs right at the top of your head. Minayin lerabot kol harosh. How do we know the whole head? Talmud lomar birosham lerabot kol harosh. Okay, therefore it says birosham, that includes the whole head. But what's the problem? Well, ein li ela b'kohanim. That pasuk about the head, right? It sounds like if you read the simple reading, both the issue of chayav al kol korcha or korcha only appears in the kohanim, and the issue of the whole head only appears by the kohanim. So you might have thought, okay, only by the kohanim. Sheriba b'hem hakatuv mitzvot yiterot, because the kohanim in general have a higher standard. They have all sorts of mitzvot that are extra to them that they can't do that other people can. Yisrael minayin, how do we know that this applies to the regular Jew as well? Ne'emar kan korcha v'ne'emar lalan korcha gzera shava. This says korcha there, right? Lo yikruchu korcha, and it says lo tasimu korcha. Because the same word appears in both, we're going to learn from one to the other and in both directions. So how does it work? Mal halan chayav. So the first two things we just learned, mal halan chayav al kol korcha or korcha, just like the Kohen is obligated on every single time he pulls out hairs, and chayav, right, a separate set of lashes, and chayav al rosh kebein einayim, and the whole head is the same as between the eyes, meaning you'll be chayav on the whole thing. Same thing for the non-Kohen. Now, what did we learn from the pasuk about the Yisrael? Ma lahalan al meit, afkan al meit. Remember, the mourning issue wasn't mentioned at all in the pasuk about the Kohanim. And in fact, right, the pe'atz kanam lo yigalechu is in there, which has nothing to do with mourning, but because the mourning appears by the Yisrael, we're going to apply it because Gzeira Shav is working both directions. We're going to say also for the Kohen, Afkan al Meit. Okay. Hane arba v'chamesh krichot hechidami. Okay. How can you be liable for 4 or 5? What's the case exactly? Ilema bezer chazeu b'chamesh hatraot pshita. If we say that you pulled out, right? You were warned, don't do it. You know, if you do it, you'll get lashes. And then you did it. And then they warn you again. And then you do it. And then they warn you again and you do it. So, okay, that's obvious you're going to get. The commission can't be telling us something so obvious. Turning out I'm a bet. If it was one warning and you did it 5 times, you wouldn't be obligated either. So now we're kind of stuck. Can't be, it was one warning. Can't be there were 5 warnings. So that doesn't sound like it was anything. So we'll see in a minute. How do we know with one warning you wouldn't be obligated? Because v'hatnan, look at it, the case of a nazir. A nazir, shayash shoteh yain kol hayom. If a nazir can't drink wine, drinks wine all day long, eino chayav el achat. Okay, because they were warned in the beginning of the day, don't drink wine. And then the nazir went right away and drank wine and then drank more wine and more wine and more wine. All one warning, you don't get any more lashes. Only if amrulo al tishteh, al tishteh, if every time before he drank they warned him, then v'hu shoteh chayav kol echad ve'echad. So basically, how do we explain this case? It doesn't make any sense. To which the answer is a bit of a weird case. Lo tzricha desach chamesh etzba'otav nasha. He put a depilatory cream on 5 of his fingers. Ve'otvinu bevat echad. And then, before he did anything, he was warned, if you do that, you're going to be liable. And then took the 5 fingers, put them on his head in 5 different spots, all at the same time, and all connected to that one warning, but 5 different actions. Okay? And then, in that case, since he did it right after the warning, all 5 actions, without a break in between or anything, all at the same time, that would be the unique case where the Mishnah was talking about that you'd be liable 4 or 5 times. In this case, it would be 5 if you used your 5 fingers. Okay, now we get to kama shiur korcha. How much hair do you have to remove in order for it to be considered korcha, to be liable? Rav Huna Amar, and we're going to see there's different, not just different opinions, but different ways of measuring, and we'll see in a minute. So we're going to see in the end 3 different opinions. Rav Huna Amar, it has to be a noticeable bald spot that you make. Okay, what that is also somewhat subjective, right? It's not so clear. We're going to see there's a lot of terms here in general in this sugya that are not going to be so clear what they are. So it's as long, right? If it can be seen from the head that there's a bald spot. Rabbi Yochanan Omer Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Kigris, which is a certain size, a certain type of bean. Okay, the size of a bean. Okay, that's the size of the bald spot that you create. Again, these are both relating to sizes of a bald spot that you create. So it's similar, but one is more subjective, like it looks like you're missing something, and one is an actual amount, size of something. In parentheses, we're going to read it because it makes a lot more sense to read the parentheses. This is the Gersa of the Rush. Kitinai. This is like a machloket tanaim, what these two opinions just said, because look, kama shiur kocha ki gris. Achirim omrim kadesh yer emirosho. So here you have the two same opinions, either a gris or it can appear that way. But Amar Rav Yehuda bar Chaviva, Rav Yehuda bar Chaviva came and said, Pligi batate tanai. There's three opinions in the Tanaim, and here you're going to see one that's totally different than all the others. Chanomer Kagris, Chanomer Kadesher Emerosho, those are the two we saw, which again are describing a size of a bald spot. Vechanomer Kashtei Sa'arot, which is actually what you would have expected. How many hairs do you have to remove, right? So again, you could say it doesn't really matter how many hairs you remove if you don't look bald at all, right? You have to be balded from it, and those are the other opinions. It has to be a certain size of baldness for it to work. This is focusing on the action of taking out hairs. If it's 2 hairs, that's a number, that's an amount we know from other things, which have nothing to do with this. Like if you grow 2 hairs, then, that's a sign of maturity. But anyway, shtei sarot. Some people say, no, it's not shtei sarot, which again is a totally different type of measurement. It's a totally different way of coming up with a shiur. It's how many hairs and not what the size of the bald spot is. But some people say, no, the third opinion is actually b'ka'adasha, which makes a little more sense, the size of a lentil. It's similar to a size of baldness. It's just a different size. It's smaller than a bean. Tana, okay, so now we have v'simanech. Sorry, I skipped a line. Simanech, how do you remember this second opinion that it's ka'adasha and it's not shtei sa'arot? Baheret kigris u'mechya keva'adasha. Okay, this comes from psukim in our parsha this week in Tazria. Baheret is like a grease, and mechya is beka'adasha. These are leprous marks, and there are words that appear in the psukim about the leper. And if you remember it that way, you remember the grease and the adasha, and you remember somehow, I don't know how, but I guess for them this meant something. I think for us, we're less into leprosy to be able to really relate to this. But that was the way they remembered. It's either grease or adasha when it comes to the baldness here. Okay, Tana, another braita about this. Hanotil melopi hazug b'Shabbat chayav. Okay, now we're on a different topic, but it has to do with taking hairs out. If you pull out a hair on Shabbat, we're now going to learn about all different issues where pulling out hairs come up. You take out a hair on Shabbat, that's a malach, a tolada. Okay, it's like being tolesh, like removing something from the ground. Okay, like it could be from gozez, kotseo, one of these things. So if you take out, you cut with a scissor, okay, like a scissors full, which is also a very unclear term. What's a scissors full? First of all, there's a great footnote in the Koran about the word zug. Okay, zug is a pair in Hebrew. He says it comes from the Greek zugan, which is a word that means it actually was an implement they used with the cattle, and it was 2 pieces put together. And from there, it was taken to mean any 2 things put together. What's a scissor? It's 2 knives or 2 razors, right, put together. So that's how we got to that a scissor is a zug, and that's how we get to a zug is a pair. All comes from this. Even though the root itself has nothing to do with a pair, it's just an implement that has a pair of things together, and then from there, they learn this. Okay, so now okay, so after they bring this braita, they say kama melopia zug, and this is the not the Tanaitic source, but later the Amoraim said, okay, what's a scissors full? You're going to be liable on Shabbat for removing hairs. Rabbi Yehuda shtayim. Okay, he says two hairs. So then the Gemara says, wait a minute, how could you say melopia zug in that braita is 2 hairs? Because later in the braita it says likorcha shtayim, right? So it says notel piazug b'Shabbat chayav. On Shabbos, you're going to be chayav for the scissors full. When it comes to taking out hairs for the issue of pulling out hairs because you're mourning someone, that's 2. So it sounds like melo piazug is not 2. Otherwise, it would have said, then would have used the same term for both. So they fix it and they say, Ema b'chein lekorcha shtayim. Just to add the word and likewise for korcha, it's 2, which is the same as the previous. Okay, and that's the way they resolve that. And here's a braita, though, to prove that. It's not just they're saying this, but here's a braita that sounds very similar. Tanya, or they can prove this. Tanya nami hachi, hanotel piazug b'Shabbat chayav. And there in the braita already it says, v'kama melo piazug shtayim. There you see it explicitly, that they defined it already in the braita, not the Amoraim later, but already the Tanaim were defining it. And they said it's 2, even though Rabbi Eliezer disagrees there. And he says, Omer achat. He says even taking 1 hair, you're liable. But modim, and this is continuing in the braita, we're just off topic now because there's all sorts of things about taking out hairs. Okay, so we have Shabbos because you're plucking out. Okay, we have taking out for mourning, which is forbidden. And there's another issue, which we're going to talk about right now, which is it's forbidden for a man to pluck gray hairs or white hairs. Okay, we're going to say now. If a man pulls out one white hair, one is already significant because pulling out one white hair is you're getting rid of a white hair. You have the intent to get rid of a white hair. One is already doing a serious action. And if he does it on Shabbat, it's also already a serious action because Shabbat, a malachet machshevet, is defined as something that means something to you. Now, if you just pull out a hair, that's not so meaningful. If you pull out two, it's already more meaningful. But if you pull out one white hair, you pulled it out on purpose because you wanted to get rid of the white hair, that has significance in of itself for Shabbat. And now they're going to say, oh, forget about Shabbat. It's even b'chol, davar ze afilu b'chol atzur. Even not on Shabbat, it's forbidden. Mishum shene'amar lo yubash gever simlat isha is a very famous thing that here they basically this braita says that part of not doing things that men can't wear women's garments is also pulling out white hairs. That's beautifying themselves like women do. So men are not allowed to do that at all. And even one white hair would be a problem to pull out. Okay, so there you have different shiurim about pulling out hairs for different topics. Again, we all got to this because we were trying to define what is this melo, right? How we actually got to it because there's also some other shiur about hair removal on Shabbat, and then we tried to figure out what it is. And from there, we got into this other source that mentioned also the pulling out white hairs. Hamakif pe'at rosho. So now we're going to get to what we talked about before. Tanu Rabbanan pe'at rosho, sof rosho. Okay, again, they have a term that we don't understand. Okay, the corners of your head is the end of your head. Okay, that really didn't help. Ezehu sof rosho. So they ask, please explain, what does that mean? And it sounds like the braita itself is explaining this. If you have a Koran, they have great pictures here. Okay, they're actually in the next daf, the pictures. This is if you basically, you make a straight line. You make it like a straight line between your forehead and your ear. Or basically, right, if you get rid of all the peot, so you can make this straight line, that's what it means. From behind your ears and your forehead, that makes this straight line. And then kind of like it goes around to the back of his head. And then you have this lo takifu. Lo takifu means don't make a circle around. Right? It doesn't say don't destroy, where it says lo tashchi pe'atz kanam. By the beard, it says don't destroy. Here it just says don't make your hair like a rounded haircut, which I assume is like a Roman or pagan thing that people were doing. So because of that, you can't walk around looking like that. Now, another braita they bring, but here the Amoraim are bringing it. Tane Tana Kameda Rav Chisda, a person who would recite braita, brings the braita before Rav Chisda. Echad makif ve'echad nikaf lokeh. One who cuts this off and one who gets their peot cut off, both of them get lashes. Okay, now this, by the way, is only forbidden for men. Okay, just to be clear, there's no isur for women. Take off the peot of their rosh, their zakan, anything. So now there's an interesting question that arises before we get to the question of the Gemara. But if you say that someone who cuts the peot gets lashes, and someone who also gets their own peot cut off, there's a question about whether women are part of this. Because what if a woman gives the haircut and cuts the peot? Does she get lashes? Because she's not really part of this prohibition at all, or not. Okay, it's not discussed here, but it is an interesting discussion that comes up here about, not here, but off the daf, about whether a woman, I can't remember now if it actually comes up in the Gemara somewhere, but whether a woman is liable or not for this isur. I think it's more in the Rishonim. Okay, I could be wrong. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. So they say, wait a minute. Someone who's sitting eating dates in the sieve will get lashes. Okay, what this means, there's multiple interpretations. We actually saw the exact same thing in Sanhedrin in a different sugya. They seem to be saying, okay, I can't even say what they seem to be saying because there's so many different interpretations. Some people think that this means, how could you get lashes for just sitting in the barber's chair doing nothing, right? Like you didn't do any action. You don't get lashes for not doing action. Like someone who sits doing something totally permitted, what they're going to get lashes. Some people think that maybe you were doing something forbidden. It's unclear what this image is, but let's just go with one of them, which is, you didn't do any action. How could you, I'm just sitting in the barber's chair. The barber cut off my peo, assuming I'm a man. I'm going to get lashes for that. First of all, we know lav shein but maaser and lokin alav. I didn't do anything. So first answer is actually that. Da'amar lachmane. They say, who is it? Rabbi Yehuda. Da'amar lav shein but maaser lokin alav. Remember, there's a big machloket. So this must hold by Rabbi Yehuda that even though you don't do an action, you get malkut. By the way, some people say the reason why both of them get it is darshan from the pasuk lo takifu. Lo takifu is in plural. Now it could be talking to the Jewish people. Don't do this, all of you. But there's also plural there. It could mean there's two people. Some people darshan it some other way. Rava gives a different answer. Rava Amar b'makif la'atzmo v'divrei hakol. He says, you don't have to say it's just Rabbi Yehuda. I'm going to explain this according to everybody. What's the case? Where you cut your own payout, and then you're going to be liable for two things. Even though still it's a question really how you can be liable for two things. But you're liable because you did it, and you're liable because now you have it on you. So you are liable for an action you did, and we're going to actually give you malkot on both. And the chana makifa, kada nikaf, one who does it and one who it's done to, is the same person and just gets two sets for that. Here's another interpretation. Rabbi Yomi He says, I can also explain according to everyone, but differently, where you help with the haircut, right? Ever get a haircut, right? And people say, oh, the haircutter says, move your head this way, go, your head's not straight, all sorts of things. If you move to help them cut your hair, then you're actually doing an action that's helping you be part of them cutting the payout, and that would make one liable. Now we get to Mashchit Pe'atz Kano, Tanu Rabbanan Pe'atz Kano, Sof Kano. Okay, so again, they're defining what are the pe'ot. They say the end of the zakan. Okay, that didn't really help. So remember, pe'ah is the corner of the field, right? The corner, like the end of your beard. Ezu sofskano, what is this? Okay, this also doesn't really help us. Shiboletz kano. Okay, shibolet sounds like a sheaf. Okay, so they say, right, maybe at the bottom by the santer, it looks a little like a sheaf. It's a little unclear. Again, what the definition of this is, it's still left pretty unclear. And now we're going to move to Masaret Sritachad, even though we're going to come back in tomorrow's daf to because the Mishnah went, if you notice in the order, we're going to get back to the peot, because the Mishnah went in the order of, first it listed all the Isurim, and then it got to how many peot are there and how many, right? And then it defined, so we're going to get back to that later in the Gemara, because the Gemara goes in the order of the Mishnah. Now we're up to the Saret Sritachad, Masaret Sritachad. You make one cut on your body. Tanu Rabbanan B'seret. Okay, it says B'seret lenefesh lo titenu b'sarchen. Okay, a cut for a nefesh. We're going to see what that means. That means for a dead, right? For a person who died. Lo titnu b'sarchen. Don't put in your flesh. So Tanu Rabbanan B'seret. Yachol afilu sarat al bito shenafal al sfino shetava bayam. Right? Maybe if your house fell down and you're very upset about it, you pull your hairs out, right? We always say pulling out your hairs, right? Pull out your hairs for that. Or your boat sunk, right? With all your stuff on it. You had like a big shipment coming in for work and the whole thing sunk. Talmud lomar lenefesh. Eno chayav ela ala mek bilvad. No, this is only if you do it as a mourning practice, not if you're upset about some other thing that happened. This, by the way, reminds us of Masachet Brachot, if you remember. Very famous. And then they say, why? Because he's tarud, because he's got things on his mind. They said, what about tavasvina tobayam, right? What if your boat sinks? You're tarud also. But that's tarud b'mitzvah, that's not a mitzvah. Okay, here we see something similar. And there also talks about avilut. Okay, so now we're going to define those two things that were confusing. How do you know if you do 5 sritot for one person? It says seret, means each one you do. So therefore, if you did 5 for one person, each one you do, you're liable for. Rabbi Yosi wants to explain now the other one. With this we'll finish. How do you know chayav on each person, even if you just did one scratch in your body? Talmud lomar lenefesh, l'chayev al kol nefesh v'nefesh, because it says lenefesh, on each nefesh that you do it on, you're going to be liable. To which the Gemara is obviously going to ask, but wait, we just used the nefesh to teach you it's for in mourning and not for something else. So how do we get two things from that pasuk? You'll have to wait till tomorrow to get your answer. So we started with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that you're only chayav maaser sheni when you brought it in and took it out. And then we said, what about, Rabbi Yosi? We have Rabbi Yosi who seems to contradict, because there he seems to talk about this case where you can infer from what he said that it doesn't have to be in Jerusalem and then taken out, to which we said, no, he does. And then what's his chiddush? Oh, well, it must have been some other unique case, and we gave two possibilities of what that is. Then we got to all these other isurim. You got malka for korech korcha makif pat rasho, kipat's kano, soretz rita. Okay, I see, Terry, you asked about why 4 or 5. 4 or 5 is just a number they're giving. It's any number, whatever, however many you do. 4 or 5 is always just more than like a small amount. Okay, because 3 is always like the smaller amount. I mean, obviously 1 or 2 is even smaller. 4 or 5 appears in tons of Mishnayot. Like in Shabbat, there was moving 4 or 5 things out of the storage room. 4 or 5 is all over. Okay, then we got to all these drashot, right? Because remember, the korcha appeared, and we're going to have the same thing with the peot, by the way, by the Kohen and by the Israel, and then we learned from one to the other. We didn't say, oh, distinct. We're going to distinguish. And then we got into all the requisite amounts. How much is korcha? How much srita? How much, right? What's considered? What's it for? Which ones are for mourning? Which ones are not for mourning? And that's it for today. Wishing everyone good day, a chodesh tov, and b'sorot tovot.